for opening remarks. So hello everybody, I'm Jotaro Kato from Institute of Asian Migration. So I'd like to moderate today's session. So this is my first moderation in English, so I'm really nervous, but hopefully I can make a great event together with you. And thank you so much for Daniel and Mariko for joining us today. I'd like to briefly explain the logistics of the seminar. After my explanation, I'd like to introduce two speakers. Then two speakers have a 15 minutes presentation. Then we will move to Q&A sessions. We don't have any breaks today. And if you have any questions, please send it via chat, reply to all on Zoom. And during the presentation, Mariko and Daniel switch their presentation so they can see the question in advance. So during the presentation, please send a question anytime. And because of a lot of number of people joining us today, so we'd like to use the chat today. So after the presentation, I will choose some to ask speakers to answer. And this seminar is recorded and will be broadcasted later. So if you do not want to show your face, so please turn off videos. But if you want to turn on the videos, please do. So speakers should be more happy to see the many faces here. And so as Professor Farah said, this seminar is organized by Institute of Asian Migration and Waseda Institute of Asia Pacific Studies. So let me introduce today's speakers. Before that, thank you for joining us today. So we have now 119 registration today, and from mainly from Japan, but also from UK, Germany, Denmark, Brazil, Bangladesh, and more other countries. So many people are joining us today. This is one of the big merit of this online event. And we have many academic people, both faculty and students, but several civil society people also join us today. And we can find some international organization and several medias also attending us today. Okay, first, I'd like to introduce Daniel Awigra. Daniel is a project leader of today's project and a human rights activist and the deputy director of Human Rights Working Group. This is the NGO in Indonesia. He recently led multi-stakeholders policy dialogues on the ASEAN consensus on the protection of migrant workers' rights in ASEAN member states. He had served as the International Advocacy Presidium on Jaringan Buruh Migran, Migrant Workers Network since 2015. He co-founded Journalist Association of Diversity, SEJEC, in 2008. He holds a Master of Science in International Relations from the University of Indonesia. Another speaker is Mariko Hayashi. She is the research coordinator of the project and independent researcher on migration and human rights and director of Southeast and East Asian Center Community Interest Corporation based in London, where she currently leads project addressing impact of COVID-19 outbreak on vulnerable marginalized members of Southeast and East Asian migrant communities in London. She previously served as a program officer of the Sasakawa Peace Foundation, specializing in Asia-Pacific region. She holds a Master of Science in Global Migration from University College London, University of London. These two speakers, so I'll give you the presentation very soon. So let us welcome Daniel and Mariko. Thank you for joining us today. So could you share the screen?
Thank you, Jotaro, for your
Thank you, Jotaro.
My pleasure.
May I start?
Sure.
Thank you so much, Professor Gracia, Jotaro Kato, as well as Ellen from Waseda of Asia Pacific Study Institute to have us. Thank you so much. We are honored to be here to share our current project. Basically, it haven't done yet, but we are happy to share the finding to you because it's like for the academic proposal. We are happy to get also feedback from you. So I'm Daniel Awigra, as mentioned by Jotaro. I'm based in Jakarta in the Human Rights Working Group. It is like an umbrella organization comprised of around 40 organizations advocating human rights in Indonesia. Our focus is doing international human rights advocacy. I'd like to also extend our gratitude to, of course, our researchers who really work so hard, intensively during 6 months, until now. So it is also my time to say thank you to all researchers and led by Mariko. And as well, I'd like to also extend our gratitude to Sasakawa Peace Foundation, foundation from Japan, who always support us in doing this project. I know that one of or two colleagues from Sasakawa are here, so this also, I'd like to get your permit to share the finding here, as well as, of course, I'd like to say, I don't know, instead of say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, I'd like to say Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. It's non-biased in the time zone, basically. Okay, in this presentation, we put the title COVID-19, Stigma and Discrimination as Layers Borders. It's a bit different with our book title, which is Repression and Resilience. And we will know later on after we explain, especially will be done by Mariko, why stigma and discrimination as layer borders. So as already introduced by Jotaro, I'll be speaking at the beginning to introduce the background, and then followed by Mariko will share about the main findings as well as the analysis and the conclusion, and then later on go back to me in order to share the ways that we are going to have some point that we need to discuss further. So I'd like to start by sharing what we are doing so far in HRWG. Next slide, please. So instead of sharing what we do, better I show you up the latest publication we had. There are 3 books that published in the last 2 years. First is Migrant Worker Rights in ASEAN region. The second is the Shifting the Paradigms of Indonesian-Japan Labor Cooperation on the Migration Issues. And lastly, the recent one is Stay Behind Children in Myanmar, the Philippines, and Indonesia. So basically, we do regional advocacy mainly in ASEAN, just because ASEAN, since 2015, committed to deepening the integration under the platforms of ASEAN community by 2015. And then in HRWG, we discussed that which particular group that are mainly affected by this regional integrity, regional integration. So one of the main issues is, of course, migrant worker. So start from that moment, we really are focusing on doing advocacy in the rights of migrant worker within ASEAN. However, when we work on the ASEAN advocacy, some of our network saying that the trends now is a bit changing, especially after the Arab Spring, when Indonesian government stopped to send migrant workers to Middle East because of the security reason. So then the trends, the flows goes to the eastern part of Asia, which is the East Asia country, Japan, Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Macau, and many others places in East Asia. So then it is important for us to really look at, even though it's just limited sources, but we try to have initiative to work on cross-regional, not just only Southeast Asia, as well as having cross-regionally with East Asia. Next slide, please. So this is the point why we work cross-regionally, having an initiative to work cross-regionally, because now there is a new trend of driving factors of migration, which is the aging population, happen in some developed countries, if I may say, like in Japan, Korea, Taiwan, even in Southeast Asia country itself, like Singapore, Thailand, also Malaysia. So at the same time, in Indonesia, for instance, we have bonus demography, and then the other world is facing aging society, aging population. So then there's like a demand and supply of migration. So it is a new thing that we want to really look at, because from these kinds of cooperation, new cooperation under the issues of aging population, we see one paradox. We call it the paradox of care, because majority of them taking care of aging population in other country. However, they are leaving their parents who are already elderly, or even their own children who are still a very vulnerable group behind. So it is also the issues of social costs of migration that now majority of the issue of migration is dominated by the issue of economic development and then remittance, etc., etc. So we also do exercise on bringing up the issue of social costs of migration. And then we also aware the tensions of the politics, especially in Southeast Asia, having communal conflict, such as in Rakhine State, where the Rohingya people have to be evacuated. They have to flee from their own home, going to their neighboring countries, such as Bangladesh, of course, the most populous refugee camp in the world, right? More than 1 million people are in Cox's Bazar, and also spread it and stranded in some other countries in Southeast Asia, in Thailand, of course, the closest country, and then Malaysia and Indonesia. So because of this of forced migration, trafficking in person, also in this region, cross-regionally, the feature of migrant worker can be seen from the visa they hold, like us, so basically the right is really depending on which category visa they have. For instance, if you are a domestic migrant worker work in Singapore, you just only have work permit that you have to renew in a regular basis, and you then almost have no kinds of right to invite your spouse, your children to be together with you. So basically, it's totally different if you are skilled worker, if you are professional, you can be apply for permanent resident, and many rights you will get if you are professional. So there is an issue of discrimination based on the visa category. And then majority of migrant worker cooperation done under the MOU, MOA, Memorandum of Understanding and Memorandum of Agreement, without the participation of migrant worker community, CSOs, in a way they design the cooperation. So we are excluded. They are talking about us without us, basically, under the MOU cooperation. So we want to bring these voices can be to be considered. And then, of course, in the sense of politics, thank you so much. In my personal opinion, Donald Trump lost the election because he's one of the example of the rise of populism that is really bringing the issue of anti-immigrant, xenophobic, etc., etc., and also happened here in this region as well. Next slide, please. And when the COVID hits everywhere in the world, including Southeast Asia, in ASEAN, we talk about the number, of course, at first. Now, maybe the number, of course, we always debate about the data, but the data that I provide from the ILO rates around 6.9, but the latest data maybe touch around 10 million migrant workers working within ASEAN officially. So unofficially, of course, it's like much more than the official data we have. So basically 87% of them working within Southeast Asia country. And then, of course, it is the issue of transnational. There are at least main 5 corridors. The first corridor is the migrant worker from Myanmar work to Thailand as the first. The second is Indonesia to Malaysia, Malaysia to Singapore, Laos to Thailand, and Cambodia to Thailand. So this is the flowing of the people, yeah, the migration path of the migrant worker. And then specific for the COVID, we see the recent data that also you can find in our study that around 200,000 migrant workers in Singapore living in the dormitory in the country. As of 13th of August, 52,000 migrant workers, employer provided their dormitory, and then 90% of them, after get tested, they are infected, basically. It's a very significant number. 90%, those who are tested are positive or reactive on the COVID. So it is shocking us. And then in Brunei, 18.5%, and in Malaysia, 30% infected by COVID. So it's basically invite us to really see the nexus between migrant worker and the COVID. And then the policy, of course, from lockdown until the restriction. We've gone through this, period of, denial. In Indonesia, no, it is the virus never been living here because we are a religious country, for instance, and the virus not survive in in the tropical. We've been going through this, denial process, anger, blaming migrant worker as a carrier of the virus, racist sentiment, and then we bargain. Yeah, this virus is dangerous, but it's not dangerous as SARS and MERS, and then depression, and better I just I just work, okay. And then later on, now maybe we are on the periods of acceptance, new normal, new habit, second wave, third wave, dealing with new protocol, health, of things like that. So, but during this period of emergency situation, we have to have something to rely on, at least the values or the norm. Office of High Commissioner of Human Rights provide a guideline that policy taken during the emergency situation has to be legitimate under the public health goals, not using as a basis of dissent, silence the work of human rights defender, journalists, or deny other rights, take other steps are not strictly necessary to address the health condition. And then in the issue of human rights, in the discourse of human rights, the norms of human rights, we know the characteristic of human rights, interdependence and individuality of human rights. Because during these emergencies, maybe the government are in the dilemma, yeah, whether they want to saving life or livelihood of the people. So they are thinking that maybe there is like a hierarchies of right. The rights is more important than other. The citizen is more important than other non-citizen, something like that. So I think by proposing human rights, I think it will be the key success on dealing with the pandemic, because respecting human rights across spectrum, including economic, social, and cultural, and civil political rights, will be the fundamental to success of the pandemic, health response, and recovery from the pandemic. So basically, we are believing on this notion. We cannot choose this like a zero-sum game, choose this and then neglecting other. Next slide, please. And then in the earliest of stage of the pandemic, my office conduct a survey online basis, only 10 days, because we want to know at glance what is really happening for Indonesian migrant workers in some countries. We get 149 respondents, and then in some type of work, domestic migrant worker, construction, fisheries, and then farming, and also manufacture. So, and then also in some countries, Singapore, Malaysia, South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, Saudi Arabia, and so on and so forth. And then the initial finding of our survey was there is an issue in the early stage of pandemic, unpaid salary, climates of fear of being arrested, increasing working hours without additional incentive, labor abuses, hunger, etc. And then this basically the initial, the honestly reason why we come up with this project. We want to know deeper what's really happening in some destination country. So what's really happening, instead of we want to compare one country to another, better we want to know first to get to know the situation, to understand the reason. And when we do advocacy, we are more grounded basically. So during we work on the research, this is the main question that we want to answer. Will this global pandemic bring a change toward an inclusive and sustainable governance of migrant workers? So because a lot of cases in the newspaper we can read, in the television, a lot of violation, abuses toward migrant workers. Do the government really take the pandemic as an opportunity to change the governance, or they just at stake, just as it is, or even worsen from the current situation? So this is basically the question that we want to answer, to get the answer. Next slide, please. So we form a team during May and June, and then I'm so proud with this team. And of course, Jotaro is one of them, our field researchers from Japan. So any question related to Japan, I think Jotaro cannot, give it back to us. You are the one who not just only moderating, but also to answer what's really happening. You are field researchers from Japan, and also Mariko Hayashi as our research coordinator. So by this, I'd like to give a chance for Mariko to explain the key findings and the analysis, etc. Please, Mariko. I thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Daniel, for the background information. And thank you so much, Jotaro-san, for moderating these sessions. And thank you, Professor Farah, for these opportunities, and your colleagues from Institute of Asian Migration and Institute of Asia Pacific Studies for hosting us. So yeah, my name is Mariko, and I am an independent researcher. And at the moment, I'm currently based in London. I also work for a small community organization called Southeast and East Asian Center. We work with members of migrant communities from Southeast and East Asian regions as well. But here I am as a project research coordinator of this project, and I'm going to share with you about our study. And so, yes, our research we conducted together. The objectives are here. So basically we aim to assess the impact of COVID-19 response measures and also the pre-existing migration policies on rights of migrant workers, how they impacted the rights of migrant workers during the pandemic, and also to explore how the vulnerabilities of migrant workers translated into the lived experience of these people, and how the state and non-state actors have been dealing with the challenges faced by migrant workers. And also, the last but not least, because this is an advocacy research, we try to amplify voices of people who are affected and bring these voices to the multi-stakeholder at national and regional level. And we cover 7 major destinations in East and Southeast Asia. So they are Hong Kong, Japan, Malaysia, Singapore, South Korea, Taiwan, and Thailand. So how we worked with 7 field researchers, actually 8 field researchers from 7 destinations, and all of them work directly with migrant workers. So either they are frontline workers on NGO practitioners, or they work as a researcher, but community-based researchers. And we started from the desk research in June, and the field research was conducted by the field researchers from July up until the end of August, or some cases until September. And the analysis and report writing process is just about to finish, and we are going to launch it in a couple of weeks' time. And it is a qualitative research, and it's an advocacy research. So we try to fill the gap between the public discourses around the pandemic, which is overemphasizing the statistics, but instead we try to bring the lived experiences of migrant workers as one of the most affected groups. And also it focuses on understanding issues that are significant in each destination rather than having a comparative study, and we appreciate the differences in different contexts. And we also include information and data from local sources in order to fill the gap. That's the information that's available in literature in English. Also, we also have raw data. We call it stories that are gathered from the field researchers as well. So yeah, I'm going to start sharing the findings. Instead of going one country by country by country, I would like to share with you with the more some common findings that we had and the challenges that we kind of shared together. So as an assessment of COVID-19 response measures and its impact, so the obvious measures that we all been affected is travel and movement restrictions and entry bans, and also some gathering bans as well. So they obviously affected migrant workers in the way that they are not able to return home after or during their contract visa expired, and they're only given short-term limited extensions over time. And there has been unfair restriction towards foreign nationals. So there are some entry bans that apply to certain nationalities or certain visa holders. And also the restriction of movement, that's as a government policy sometimes, but also imposed by the employers. For example, there has been a lot of cases reported that the workers are not allowed to leave their workplaces or dormitories. And gathering bans also have huge impact on migrant workers, particularly there were cases from the Hong Kong, Taiwan, where for domestic workers, it's a very regular activities to gather on their day off to meet with the fellow other migrant workers, share information, get support from migrants organization, etc. So the gathering ban has limited the access to these
パパが見つけてくれたの? トミも気になってたから探してくれたんだね。
And there's the other issues here are the testing and PPE distribution or access to healthcare that are also based on nationalities and migration status. There's some criteria, registration for residency or national insurance has been used as a criteria. And also there's misuse of disease control as immigration control. So what this means is that there has been a raid against the undocumented, crackdown on undocumented migrant workers in Malaysia, happened back in May. That was used as sort of immigration control. And the limitation on businesses and economic activities, it affected everybody in the way that we lost, a lot of people lost work and income. But for migrant workers who often live with the employers or live in the dormitories, that they're losing work, meaning losing home as well. And there's a lot of exploitations and unfair treatment against foreign workers. And also this is something that's specific to migrant workers because a lot of migrant workers their visas are tied to their employers or type of work. So once they lose work, they also lose their status as well. And there are a lot of initiative from the government in different ways to support people financially. But again, these are the eligibilities are based on nationality, citizenship, or status, or the residency registration. So it basically excluded most of migrant workers in these two regions. Although the case in Japan, thanks to the advocacy work of civil society, has been comparatively good compared to other destinations that we looked at, that it does include people of foreign national, regardless of status. But also we are aware that there still has eligibility based on the residency registration, and also access to information and access to application has been still a big challenge. And also there are some economic stimulus sort of support that is given to or given through the employers or businesses, so which does not really directly benefiting the migrant workers themselves, and their social protections are very limited. And there are some requirements for quarantine, but for migrant workers who live in overcrowded dormitories, it's not possible to keep social distances or like stay in the safe quarantine facilities. And also there's migrant workers in private workplaces, domestic workers mostly, so they face greater risk of exploitation and abuses because they do stay with their employers 24/7. And again, also cost of quarantine, it's a financial burden for a lot of migrant workers. And then some governments have asked employers to bear the cost, but there's lots of employers or agencies charging the workers instead of covering it for them. And there's been a lot of information campaign efforts done by different stakeholders, but there's very limited information in relevant languages, and also accessible formats for migrant workers are not widely available, and lack of participation in disseminating information, which means that basically there are a lot of translated information, but they are only on the government website, for example. Then we don't go to government website ourselves even, but a lot of migrant workers rely on social media platforms. So that kind of strategy has not been used properly, and therefore it's like still information dissemination is very much heavily relying on NGOs and self-help groups. And also there is a problem with the limited access to means of communication. A lot of migrant workers are restricted on their use of mobile phone or internet during work time, which cut them off from the vital information. And so we see some patterns here during this COVID-19 response measure assessment. And of course, because it's a public health crisis, the rights to health is very important. So the not only access to healthcare itself, but access to the goods, PPE, and services, and informations, and safe living, working condition is still a big challenge for a lot of migrant workers. And there's labor rights violations during the pandemic has increased, and unfair treatment and exploitation. I've talked a lot about domestic workers already, but we also saw some cases of PPE factories. So Malaysia is the biggest supplier of rubber gloves, and also there are some cases from South Korea where undocumented migrant workers have been exploited in face mask factories. And there has been, the nationality, citizenship, and status has been used as a criteria of service, and it cuts a lot of people from accessing this service. And also, even though they are eligible for some services, there is, the challenge is that the people do not hold their own personal documents, which are taken away by their employers or agencies. That's still quite common practice. And there is a fear of immigration law enforcement that's been barriers, as I explained about the crackdown on undocumented migrants. And yeah, this extension of visas has been happening, but often it's a very short term and case by case sometimes. So it just keep giving people uncertainty, and which affect the mental health of people as well, together with other issues such as exploitations and increased surveillance. And again, behind the closed door, there is an increased risk of gender-based violence and people who lost work who end up being homeless. And I want to give some examples from how these challenges has been translated into the people's daily experience. So we've asked the field researcher to come up with 2 or 3 groups of migrant workers. They want to have a close kind of look during the research. So from Hong Kong and Singapore, there is a group, one of the groups that chose domestic workers. And the issues here, I will not repeat because I've already said that. But there's another thing is that came up with the stigmatization of migrant domestic workers as virus carrier. There's a lot of discrimination against them. And there are a couple of quotes that I took from field researchers' notes, which is, so one says that at home, we are afraid of employers, not the virus. On holidays, we are afraid of police, not the virus. So this is talking about exploitation. And also it's a gathering ban that happened in Hong Kong, that the police are going around the park, checking people's identity card and telling them not to gather around. And the other thing here is it's very burdensome. Besides having to respond to pandemic conditions like this, you also have to face the attitude of an employer who always think of me as dirty and afraid to be the virus carrier. And that's stigmatization here. And the other group of workers are construction workers. So again, the issues are repeated here. Oh yeah, I also want to, go back to the domestic workers case. I want to mention that in these countries and other countries as well, domestic workers are often not recognized as workers by law. So they are not protected by the labor laws, which really increase the risk of exploitation. And going back to the construction workers, so again, the issues are, what I've explained already. But then there's another issue here was that there's a lot of rumor going around the dormitories, because they are very cut off from the rest of the society, and they rely on the information on social media. And there's a lot of misinformation around as well. And there's another quote here. Says, I was asked not to come to the construction site because our work has been closed temporarily. And I used to stay in Kongje, which is the living site, but was asked to leave because there was a rumor that there will be an immigration raid. So he is an undocumented migrant worker. And he actually left the workplace and the dormitory as well. And then he says, what worries me is that my passport will expire in September. Now I don't have work or employers that enable me to renew my work permit. And I want to go back to Bangladesh, but the cost is too high and I still need to work a few more years. And then there's another example from Thailand, which is very unique case because our field researcher is based in Chiang Rai, which is at the northernmost part of Thailand that shares border with Laos and Myanmar. So it's a border area, and around these regions, the lockdown happening in Thailand has caused exodus of large number of migrant workers, which caused a chaotic situation around the end of March, I think. And then after the border has been closed, and when the government start lifting the border closure, the priority has given to expats and white collar foreign workers. So these workers around in the border area will still not be able to come back to Thailand legally. So that caused people crossing border. There's a lot of river that's as a border. So they cross these rivers unlawfully, and they are criminalized and stigmatized as non-documented workers. So we also have a look at a few different groups, which is quite interesting. I'm not going to go to too much detail here because I'm a bit aware of the time, but we also looked at fishermen in distance water in Taiwan. So F4C is a flag of convenience fishing vessel. So Taiwan hosts a lot of fishing vessel in distance water, and either have a flag of Taiwan or owned by a Taiwanese owner. But because they work on the distance water, they're not considered as migrant workers of Taiwan. It's a very vague situation, and they don't have a right to land. So during the pandemic, they don't have anywhere to go to get the healthcare or PPE or any other services. And again, they are managed by fishing agency, not by the Ministry of Labor like other migrant workers. So they are not also, again, protected by law as a migrant workers. And there's the cases of workers under temporary guest worker scheme. So in Japan, it's DITP, and also in South Korea, it's employment permit, the workers under employment permit system. So I think a lot of people here are quite familiar with these issues of this kind of group of migrant workers, so I'm just gonna skip it. But one thing is that I think the job mobility issues are very big for this kind of group of migrant workers. And then we also looked at how the role of, how the non-state actor has been working to deal with the situations. And of course, we all come from civil society, so we looked at how the local civil society, and especially NGOs and self-help groups have played significant role especially in humanitarian assistance and disseminating information, and also providing culturally sensitive support, and also signposting people to the mainstream service providers. And these been relatively very effective because of the trusted relationship that they already had with the migrant communities. So they can immediately respond to the emerging need of the communities. And the other section of the work of civil society is advocacy work to eliminate the discriminatory measures. So we had a very good story from South Korea, where the group of CSO has filed a complaint and demanded to the National Human Rights Committee to look at the measures of the government, discriminatory measures on PPE distribution, and also financial assistance, which were given based on the nationalities or immigration status. And the National Human Rights Committee has said that it was violating the human rights, and they have recommended the government to review the measures. And also, some CSOs has gathered donations and distributed as a financial aid for those people who do not have access to the public financial aid. And I know that in Japan, there is an effort done by SMJ. There's a few similar, a bit smaller scale, but there's a few similar cases that we saw from other countries as well. And yes, of course, there are other non-state actors, can be businesses and employer who also supported their workers in a very good way. And also, like, there is a business owners who also have their own migration history. They have been supporting their fellow migrant workers. And also the religious community has been a center for self-helping groups as well, and also providing culturally sensitive and sometimes spiritual or psychosocial support, which is very important for some people. And yes, finally, so we want to just look at as a conclusion, we want to look at the vulnerabilities of migrant workers and the structural issues around that. So we title our presentation as COVID-19, stigma, discrimination as layers of borders. But we want to look, what we had really learned here is that most of the challenges that faced by migrant workers are rooted in the way that they have been treated and positioned in the society since before COVID. So it's not new. And basically, their treatment has been based on national interest, which is both from the countries of origin and also destination, but it's centered around economic development and national security rather than the protection. And because of that, during the pandemic, their vulnerabilities have been accelerated. It's not something that came up new. And the nationality, citizenship, migration status are used as a criteria of essential services. So there has been inclusion or exclusions based on the legal status. So it's reproducing the border control again. So you have to show your passport, you have to show your visa to get access to these services. And stigmatization, discrimination leads to underrepresentation and lack of participation and engagement. So which again cause the problem around information and access to support. Temporarily low wage and undocumented migrants often restricted in the way that they have no or very little access to participation, full participation into the society. Of course, it also depends on the level of democratization or available civic space in each country. And resilience to be acknowledged and supported. So, but we saw the problem that the essential support for vulnerable, underrepresented migrant communities has long relied on civil society and local initiative. So when the government tried to intervene in the wake of pandemic, it's not very much effective because there has not been the process of trust building. And as a result, because it's a public health crisis, it fails to protect society as a whole. And migrant workers, communities, and then supporters have shown the resilience, and which really should be supported along the way of the efforts that come from other stakeholders. And lastly, I will just touch upon on the limitation of our research and what we might be able to do in the future. So our study looks at some selected aspects of the measures, so we haven't covered all, obviously, and we need to look at more. So we should have more deeper analysis around the intersectionality of migrant workers' rights and the roles of other stakeholders such as embassies, international donors, and organizations. We haven't looked at it enough, and the situation in countries of origin. So how this COVID-19 response measures in destination has been impacted the prospective migrant workers who were paid the recruitment fees and being trained to come to Japan or South Korea or other places. What happened to these people? Or people who has been repatriated, what's their life afterwards? And what happened to the families and dependents that rely on the remittances? So we need to understand more about the situation in the countries of origin. And as pandemic still continues, we need to monitor ongoing situations and long-term impact of the COVID-19 and the response measures, and continue our engagement between actors of countries or regions, of destinations and also origin. So join up on our activity, our exercise of study. We come up together. We come up with this proposed guideline to protect migrant workers' rights during the pandemic. During the public health crisis. So this is like how we can use our study, how we can use our research in order to advocate the rights of migrant workers. So I'm gonna hand over back to Danielle, so we can probably talk a bit more about our advocacy plans or what's next.
Thank you so much, Mariko. You already comprehensively explained, start from the methodology we have, and then the key findings, and then also the analysis, both common challenges with the examples, as well as the conclusion of the study, the structural issues of the study. So it is basically our lesson learned from having exercise in 7 destinations. We would like to bring the life experience, the stories of migrant workers. So our work basically is facilitating the stories, the problem faced by migrant workers, especially during the pandemic, and we try to aggregating the stories and then try to conceptualize, as well as to bring their voices becoming visible, and then hopefully it can be a channel as a tools of advocacy again, and then also consideration of the policy making for some policy maker. So we come up with some point. Later on when we launch, we will share the detail of what is it about. But here we can share to you, like, there is the proposal is really clear. The proposal is basically to protect migrant worker rights during the public health crisis. It's comprised of guideline general principles. It's comprised of like recognition their vulnerability, already mentioned a lot by Mariko, as well as the recognition of their resilience, and then of course non-discriminatory principle, and also where the issues of stigma and discrimination contributed to a lot of human rights violation and abuses, and also lack of engagement and participation that it make them on a much challenging situation during the pandemic. And then there's some rights, not all rights, but this is the rights that really appears pressing during our exercise. Of course, right to healthcare, goods and services, right to information, decent work and social protection, right to safe and fair immigration processes, right to be protected from trafficking, right to workers at remote, private, hard to reach workplaces, right to safe living condition, and role of civil society and international and cross-regional cooperation. I think this is typically of COVID situation. Like for instance, what's happened in Singapore and Malaysia, for instance, like it's confirmed there is a huge attention from the government to really look at the living condition, because when the migrant workers are living in the overcrowded situation and the spread of disease are faster, than as I explained earlier, that in Singapore the number touch around 90% of all that get tested and affected by COVID. So I think it is really typically that appears during our exercise. Next slide, please. And this is, I think, important to bring as an example. Of course, it is just an exercise that I come from the region where there is a multilateral cooperation under the ASEAN cooperation. There are response, there is commitment, there is a lot of initiative put on the paper. Of course, there's a need to really look at, to really challenge the implementation of the commitment they made. So basically, in ASEAN, since the beginning, the leader of ASEAN already signed or made a special session, special summit to respond to COVID on April. And then, of course, touch upon their external partner, such as ASEAN +3, and they try to have a cooperation in strengthening the resiliency and sustainability on regional supply chain, especially on food, commodities, medicine, medical, and essential supplies. So basically, it's also our business, basically like cross-regionally, Southeast Asia and East Asia, as well as a joint statement dedicated by the ALMM or ASEAN Labor Ministerial Meeting to really addressing the issue of coronavirus that impacted the labor and employment. And then I joined the 13th forum session of ASEAN Forum on Migrant Labor last month. The team is really, is really dedicated to support migrant workers during the pandemic for a cohesive and responsive ASEAN, hosted by Vietnam as the chairs of ASEAN. What's important of this forum is basically that, even like activists like me is invited to discuss on the way the policy can be addressed, the issue from the field. So basically, it is something that we have in Southeast Asia under the ASEAN. It is tripartite plus platform. Tripartite meaning that the government, business representative, trade union, and civil society come up together to discuss in one particular issue and come up with a recommendation. Of course, the recommendation is only recommendation. We need to really work on, to really monitor and evaluate the effectivity of the recommendation, whether it is being implemented or not. And then as well, it is also come up during the Vietnam Championship. It is very good document, if I may say. It's very good because it also includes some human rights language, human right norm there, even though it is, of course, we at the beginning, in doubt whether in Vietnam the addressing of human rights can be happen or not. But very fortunate that we can come up with a good document, ASEAN strategic framework for public health emergencies. So it is like a framework to work among sectoral bodies of ASEAN under one framework to deal with the public health emergencies. So, and there is a human right consideration in it. And then lastly, thing that it is also an information that can be our reference, that in ASEAN they will establish the regional center on public health emergencies and emerging diseases. So it is also ASEAN want to come up with the collectively respond, not just only one by one country respond, but jointly as a regional come up with a center on the pandemic, on the public health emergencies, in a way maybe to have a lesson learned from the current pandemic to be a more resilient in the future, that if there is another pandemic, there is a lot of like a research or lesson that we can be used. I heard that this initiative is supported by the Japan government. So the center is still debatable in 3 countries of ASEAN, but it is the initiative that will be invested by the Japan government. Next slide, please. I think instead of we are giving to you like some direction, I'd like to invite to have a discussion with you all to some issues. Basically, first, we know that the dilemma that faced by the government in dealing with these issues. Of course, we know that closing the door on dealing with national issue, there's already a lot of example, like worsen example happened to migrant worker. So of course it needs like not just only regional or maybe cross-regional solidarity is needed to deal with these issues. And then if it is the case, who will take lead on the leadership on this regional solidarity? A lot of experts saying that the examples of South Korea, Taiwan, or even Japan in East Asia country can be one of the model on the way they mitigate to get away from the virus, comparing like some more developed country in the West, like in the US or in the EU. So I think who will take lead on these kinds of regional solidarity within Asia, for instance. And then, of course, we are as an advocate of human rights, migrant workers' right advocate, gender advocate. Of course, we keep pushing our agenda. But of course, as I already mentioned earlier, that maybe on the framework of the government, they are thinking that there are hierarchies of rights, that this is more important than others. So how are we going to really advocating our concern in the language that can be also considered as the same important as their concern, like their public health, security, and things. And then also we need to think about the acknowledge, like already mentioned several times by Mariko, the resilience from the community, self-help group that need to be supported. So I think in how are we going to support the existing example that it's becoming new precedent. It's never been happened. People are really supporting each other. Maybe it used to be more ego community, but during pandemic, we saw that a lot of good example where people really work together. So how are we going to support that in order we can promote or shape toward an inclusive and sustainable society? So I think this is an important example from the experience of this period. And then if we also want to work together, which platform do we want to work on? In the international level, we have Global Compact for Migration. It is non-legally binding. It's like a voluntary basis. But except Singapore, I think majority of country in Asia already as part of the Global Compact. So maybe we can use during the session to address some issues about the migrant worker and of course the pandemic. And then, we have UN Convention on the Rights of Migrant Worker. Unfortunately, many of receiving country, they don't sign and not the party of UNCMW. However, it is of course, we can also maximize the session under the UN treaty, or even the forum like UPR, we can use SDGs, ILO. They have some session in ILO also. So in which level? Internationally, regionally, we have ASEAN +3, including Japan, China, and South Korea. We have also regional comprehensive economic partnership, or we always talk about ASEAN +6, you know. And I know that during ASEAN +3, there is a cooperation on the specific area of migrant cooperation. So why don't we use this as a tools of advocating cooperations of migrant worker, in ASEAN +3 or ASEAN +6. In the national level, we have G2G, B2B, and most likely it is under free trade agreement. Majority of the migrant worker cooperation, and we know if it is under economic partnership, it's always often put the migration as a labor, as a trade, like a for trade, just an ad hoc issues. So it's like basically is treated as a good and services and migrant workers. So basically, it is something that we need to advocate further. And then lastly thing from this initiative, I think we need to have like this forum initiated by the academia, CSO, to really ask, like to share what's have been happening from various perspectives, state perspective, civil society, victim perspective. I think it's also good to have some kinds of forum to share to good practice and to get some ideas or initiative to really come up with real change in the society. Lastly thing, next slide please. I'd like to invite you all to come to our official launching on the December 17th. So it will be inviting another field researchers from Taiwan and Malaysia, and all will be discussed by Indonesian ambassador to South Korea and advocate of civil society, executive director of Forum Asia, and it will be the keynote will be delivered by Eni Lestari, the chairperson of International Migrants Alliance. I thank you so much and looking forward to have a very fruitful and productive Q&A session. I give it back to moderator, Jotaro Kato. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for Daniel and Mariko for the wonderful presentation. So it's very informative and it's also based on the fields. And it's also, we already have many questions from the floors. And I feel like it's common process of the both practitioner and academics. Yeah, it's pretty nice. And because I'm moderator, so I first would like to confirm the procedure again. So now we move to the Q&A session. And I'd like to try to raise any question till now to the two speakers first. Then still there's a time. I'd like to also pick up another questions. If you have a questions, please continue to write to the chat. Okay, so I think two of you work together. So I'd like to combine some questions and to throw it to you. So please answer the question. Okay, are you ready? Yeah. Okay. So first question is, I'd like to asking about sending countries. So there's a question from Professor Shire first. Her question is, I have a question about the response of sending states. Do they act, for example, through bilateral agreements or through diplomatic missions to try to protect their citizens working abroad? So how sending countries protect migrants is a question, right? And also, Mr. or Ms. Kotozaki-san also have a similar questions. I have a question. Are governments supporting immigrants who want to go home to their mother countries? I heard the Philippines prepare the flight in March. And actually, this issue is quite prevalent in Japan. So I think Japanese audience wants to know. So could you answer question about sending countries issues, including how to protect them to safe coming back to sending countries. So Daniel, Mariko, which do you want to answer?
I think Daniel is better.
Okay, Daniel.
All right, thank you so much for a very insightful question, also very much important question. First of all, of course, as a sending country, we try to protect by many layers of regulation, but of course we have to be criticized on the implementation. Like for instance, in Indonesia, we have, of course, like a law to protect migrant worker, that it's mandated at least two requirements. First, to making sure that the countries of destination have to have law or regulation to protect migrant worker in the country of destination. So this is the first requirement. The second of all, having the MOU of cooperation. So MOU that, so it's not going to just only sending, but as well, they have to look at the protecting law and regulation within the country and have to have MOU cooperation. So this is the like a legal protection that provided by the government and the state. But unfortunately, of course, it's having a breaching sometimes where like a lot of violation of sending by recruitment agency and stuff. So what kinds of protection in the reality of sending country, what kinds of protection they give, it's basically it's like it's different, diverse from sending country to another, having different kinds of interests. Like for instance, like maybe if I may mention or may explain, like or may take an example. Philippines is quite strong in terms of asking or demanding for the protections of their right. No, maybe Indonesia is trying to, but some other country maybe probably not really demanding to give the protections of rights of their migrant workers. So it's basically becoming more competition among sending country. So it is also becoming my question whether about the competitiveness, the competitiveness sometimes somehow relies on if you are not really demanding your rights, then maybe you are more wanted and then you are more, competitive. So then it's not really, how do I say, not really fulfilling their rights basically. So I think different sending country has different national interests. Even there are some countries that okay, just can work abroad is their ultimate goal, So that's why we try to really put a lot of human rights advocacy, the bilateral or multilateral cooperation. So I think this is vary from sending country to another. And in relation to the second question, I think specific to the COVID. Of course, we stopped sending or during the pandemic, a lot of travel ban and the implication we are not really sending migrant worker, and there is a lot of effort to really follow the protocols, regulation in local or things, and then our embassy also work. The embassies also work, but unfortunately within the study we are not really covering the role of embassy and stuff. So basically it is also already mentioned by Mariko, it is our limitation also not really see the role of embassy in the study. But of course, there are some effort both in sending or receiving country, and the problem in sending country, it is also a lot of, I think we need another session to really discuss about what's happening in the sending countries. I think it needs study, even not just only a session of discussion. I thank you for two questions that arise.
Yeah, so both Professor Shire and Kotodaki now also show their faces. So do you want this to add some questions to Daniel, or do you understand?
It was a great answer. I don't have any further question.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. How about Mr. Kotodaki? Okay.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm satisfied.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah. So let's move to another question, because now so another question is coming. So next question is more specific to asking about migrants themselves. Okay. A question from Professor Nicola Piper. I have a question about the problem of wage shift. Have you found any evidence in your research about that? You mentioned good employers, which is great, but as we know from pre-COVID, known and underpayment of wages has also been a big problem for many years. And so last question, okay, wait. And Yanagihara-san also having a similar questions like pre and post COVID-19. What was the baseline condition for protection of migrant workers against abuse before the COVID-19, and in what way was that affected under the emergency? So could you combine these two to answer? I think it might be from Mariko.
Yeah, okay. Thank you so much for the question. Thank you, Professor Piper. Nice to see you again. Yes, so yes, definitely. I mean, we use good practice to kind of encourage the good practice to continue and expand. But of course, there has been a lot of issues around wage theft, which has been around all the time. And during the pandemic, you know, it has been increased. We did hear from our field researchers, there are cases that employers cannot afford to pay their workers, but they still keep them work for them. And also the vulnerabilities of migrant workers that we were talking about. So one of them is the debt that they have before they arrive in the destination. So they were very heavily in debt, and that makes them more vulnerable. And once they lose work or their wages are not paid, there is the risk of human trafficking, and there has been the cases of trafficking, exploitation in PPE factories, or some cases that raised that there are a lot of undocumented workers offered work in PPE factories. In fact, they found themselves not paid enough or not paid at all, doing over-hour working. So it has, you know, it has been the issues that in around, which has deteriorated in the way of pandemic, definitely. And so that's as a benchmark, it has been happening, and it has been worse in more cases, you know, I would say. Yeah, I mean, it's very briefly, this is what we saw, and it's quite common in of course in domestic work again, and other than the factories. And maybe the plantation work as well in some cases.
Professor Piper, so do you want to add something to the answer?
No, thank you so much, Mariko. You know, in light of all these questions you have, I do not wish to take up more time, but I might contact you later if I may. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, and also, Mr. Yanagihara-san, so do you want to add some or not? Hello. Okay, so I will come back.
No, I'm fine. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Okay, let's move to the another questions. Okay, so many questions. Okay, next question is also, it's about for undocumented workers. Professor Kim says, I wonder if there's any initiative from the host and sending states to deal with the increasing number of undocumented workers who are losing their jobs due to the pandemic. Thank you very much for the presentation. So it's related to undocumented workers. So either of you, so could you answer to the question?
Yes, yeah, I'll try. So thank you so much for the question. And undocumented migrant workers has been one of the biggest focus for us, because yeah, obviously, isn't there the most vulnerable groups of migrant workers as well. What we have seen so far in relation to undocumented workers, there are some initiatives that, you know, particularly in South Korea, we saw that the government has announced that people can be tested without, you know, without being targeted of immigration control. So there are some cases, I think it was also in Taiwan, that in order to encourage undocumented migrants to come forward, they've offered a discount in the fine, for example, or they can be repatriated when the international travels are available again, instead of being detained and forced deportation. But it doesn't really offer them to regularize their status. So it's really the option are you come forward and you won't be penalized as much, and you can kind of be sent back home safely. So that's the maximum that we haven't seen that the regularization or giving kind of, you know, the equal rights to the citizens that I think we saw earlier in other countries like Portugal, for example. We haven't seen something like that in our study.
Daniel, you want to add something? Okay.
Thank you very much for your answer.
Yeah. Okay. So Daniel, do you have anything to add?
All right. Thank you. I think I just touched upon a bit about the. It is basically the main thesis of our study, that I think the policy towards migrant workers during the pandemic is not changed. So it's still, you know. So the policy is still there, you know. And then there are some measures, there are some trial, there are some measures, and then there are some regulation, local regulation, even in the local level. They try to more accommodating. They are to be more inclusive, to be more accepted. But the policy is still, the policy hasn't changed yet so far. So they're still given like a visa depending on their their status, the type of work, and things. But there are some trial to this, but the structure of the policy is still there. They're just only giving like extended visa for a couple of days and then things, but the thing is they're still treated the same. So I think by looking at this what's really happening, we go a bit deeper on the analysis of the structural analysis to see why it is happening. So we go to the conclusion where it has relation with the national interest. Why they invite migrant worker, whether it is for their economic interest to fill their labor shortage. So then they will treat it under this kinds of scheme. And also if it is economic interest, so it brings to another layers of question basically from the national interest. And then when they are demanding their rights or things, it's also depending on the level of democratic of the countries. So if more open society, then maybe their voices, their concerns can be more accepted and heard, rather than in some non-democratic country. So it's basically it has a relation with the context of socio and political situation, as well as the interest of the country, but also the level of the alignment between migrant worker and the locals, in a way they can come up together addressing their concern in the democratic or civil spaces that are available in the particular country. I thank you so much.
Thank you for your answer. Yeah, it's true. So there are many layers of the actors. So we need to see the various actors to resolve the issues. Yeah, thank you for your answer. And before moving to the next question, I'd like to encourage, I think we can pick up one or two more comments or questions. So if you have any questions, so please write to the chat, and I'd like to introduce. And because there's an English presentation, and I know there are many Japanese participants today. So if you want to say something, but it's difficult to say in English, so I can help to translate too. So please don't hesitate to raise the questions or comments. Yeah, they really want me the feedbacks of the presentation to improve their project. So any comments are highly good for them. Thank you. Okay, now so there one question is still left. It's also a question from Professor Shire in Germany. Yeah, South Korea and Taiwan. Yeah, we only have the word. Increasingly, South Korea and Taiwan are seen as best cases for having dealt with the public health crisis. There are still best cases when we look at these countries from perspective of protecting migrant workers. So could you answer the question? Yeah, you see this. I think Mariko likes the 7 countries report, right? So you just feel something. So could you say some sentiment or comments?
Yes, I think it's. I think yeah. In some ways they have been better than other. I don't want to kind of say which one is the better than the other, but yeah, I think so. And especially the South Korea, for example, among the 7 destinations that we looked at, it has a strong civil society initiative that's supported by the National Human Rights Committee. So Japan, we have a problem with having the National Human Rights Committee. We still don't have, and it's in South Korea. We saw it did play a role, and in order to kind of receiving the demand from the civil societies that some of the measures taken by the government is violating human rights, and they have pushed that through. So that kind of civic space that Daniel was talking about, that has the participations and the people's voice has been heard in some way. And also in Taiwan, yeah, they were relatively good in terms of providing services that the people are not. Of course, there's a lot of barriers, but as long as they, based on their identification card, that they get access to a lot of services. And although there's still there's challenges on languages and things like that. But yes, in some aspects, we saw good practices from these two countries. Maybe, yeah, Daniel might have some comments on that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I also want to comment a bit, like confirm there is a strong dynamic in one country to another. There is a tension even, like done by many actors, both the government and the business and the civil society, National Human Rights Commission, international actors. So it's becoming, each country having their own challenges and opportunity, basically, like it's typically, depending on the context. But what I'm trying to say is basically, there is a country, or I don't want to mention the country, but there's a country where at the beginning it's already good, having a good policy where it is treated under the public health measure, but apparently because of the wrong of political political interest, and it's becoming more a national security treatment rather than protecting. So there is a example where it's getting worsened in some way, but of course it's to be updated now, because it's happened, in the earliest stage of the pandemic. But there are some countries where, if at the beginning is national, very security mindset, very using like immigration officer to really, deal with the travel border and things, restriction. But giving dynamic, having dynamic, challenging by the civil society, they're becoming more and more, inclusive, open, and stuff. So it's basically like quite vary from country to another. But unfortunately, there is some country that even using this pandemic as a vehicle, as tools to winning their interest, which is like their they're like interest is okay, but like very strong national interest to put favorable in their own citizen, for instance. So okay, favorable in the in the human right perspective is one of types of discrimination too. I think this is my comment about it.
Professor Shire, do you understand, or you want to say something?
Yeah, Mary, perhaps just very briefly, because Mariko also mentioned that some countries are using public health measures as immigration control. And I wonder if we can start to maybe see types of approaches, because that would be important also to put pressure on countries that are going more in the securitization direction, which I don't think is better for public health, to show how a more protection approach could also help to further the public health goals. That's all.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Okay. Now, so new ones, so comment or questions so come. So two of you, so can you see it? So it's a little bit long, so I'd like to so focus on. There have been some initiatives in Macau that appears to be good practice, where the local government of Macau has worked together with Philippines and other consulates. And so here she mentions something. And are you sure aware of this practice in Macau? Is a question from Cardoso, Mr. or Ms. Cardoso. So do you have anything to that?
Well, thank you so much for the comment. I would like to know about it more. We did not include Macau for our research. We chose the kind of by number biggest destinations of in these two regions. So I personally don't really know a lot about the case in Macau. So I'd be very interested to know.
Mr. Cardoso, so are you there? You want to say something to Mariko and Daniel? Hello. Thank you for your answer. No need. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay. I think now, sir, I introduce every questions. So if I miss the questions, please let me know. So I choose immediately so lay the question. Okay. Now we have so 5 or 6 minutes. And other moderators, so may I also lay the question? So my question is, because Daniel's working with ASEAN a lot, I really know. And so Daniel and Mariko work together. So it's the work of the between combined with Southeast Asia and East Asia. And it might be possible just ASEAN work together to do something, but how comes you to decide to East Asia and Southeast Asia work together? and what is the benefit for working that, and also what is the difficulty to working that. So I'd like to learn more about why these two regions work together.
Yeah, I think for me, you know, I think the migration issues doesn't only happen in destination country. A lot of problems are very kind of, you know, starting from the pre-departure process, the recruitment of migrant workers, how they go through the pre-departure training, and also the process that they have been allocated in different workplaces. And then of course there's a lot of issues that happens in destination countries. And when I was, you know, when I was working in Japan, I see a lot of there are a lot of attention towards the situations that how migrant workers are treated in Japan, and which is, you know, very important issues to highlight. But I thought, you know, we need to know the background of these issues that has relations to the things that are happening in the country of origin, and also after they go back, what will happen to them, you know, like what experience of migrant workers in Japan will translate or like into their experiences after the repatriation. And we know that there are a lot of people migrate again and again and again, and migration is, you know, for them is the financial solutions. But why do they have to repeat that? And there's a lot of questions that I think it's very difficult to answer, only focusing on the things that are happening in this nation. So for me, and also like, you know, a lot of information, a lot of work done within civil society of both countries. So I thought, you know, I always believe in that it's important for us to have the network of both, you know, the countries of origin and destinations. And I think it's just kind of going a bit beyond. It's also like regional cooperation, because, and you know, we know that maybe like compared to East Asia, ASEAN, Southeast Asia has a very strong regional framework, intergovernmental, but also civil society has kind of, you know, the platform to work within ASEAN, and in East Asia probably not as much yet. But yeah, this is something that kind of, so kind of, you know, have tried to have the more stronger network and cooperation to address the issue of migration, which is very circular problem for me.
Okay, so Daniel also have something.
Yeah, for me also, because this trend going to East Asia becoming more increasing. So I think and very lack of space we can discuss, and cooperation mainly done under MOU and done by the government mainly. So we don't know, you know, you never been included in the process of the MOU of cooperation of migrant worker. So I think we need to know better in what's really happening in East Asia, basically, because among Southeast Asia, we meet every year, at least in the forum, as I mentioned, like the forum of migrant labor, and then there are like ASEAN Civil Society Conference and so many other forums, but it's very limited, you know, like a space for us to get to know who's the activist, labor, you know, advocate there in Southeast Asia. I'm sure there are a lot of, you know, a champion, you know, working there, but just matter of there is no kind of platform discussion. We don't know how to, at least to seek, if want to help as an emergency response. We don't know to whom we are going to contact or work with. So basically, it's like a gray area for us to know better. And then the second of all, like now I'm thinking, like, you know, after having some exercise working on this initiative, you know, I'm going to these kinds of, you know, concern. Like now, majority of migrant cooperation is really still under economic cooperation, and then also, of course, it is becoming their like a cooperation. Unfortunately, the economic cooperation, it doesn't really provide or giving benefit for the countries of sending. Like, for instance, okay, there is get remittance, but there are another costs that have to be carried by the society. We come up with a study of social cost of migration, like stay behind children, for instance, of course, if we compare from the remittance they get and the social cost that carried by the children, whether it is equal or even we are lost, So I think we need to really, trying to get attention. This is also the problem in the sending country, where our productive ages, our bonus demography are working there, and then then it becoming there is another social cost that because of a crisis of care and then things. So I think we want to really communicate what's really happening here, what's really happening there, and then it is, I think we need to work together in it.
Thank you so much here. So I understood. So this the platform or today's seminar is kind of the strategy, so making a platform to know that what is the commonality between East Asia and Southeast Asia. And also I find the last question from Professor Dufire. So I'd like to finish this session with more like so bright or hopeful way. And I think her question is really nice. And before moving to her questions, so I just want to, so because 2 minutes left, if you want to know more about our project, so I just paste a link of the Human Rights Working Group website. For the seminar, Daniel, I think in several days, you should upload the information, right? For the seminar, yeah. So please check several days later if you want to know more about this project and joining another seminar, please check the website. And on the same day or 1 day later, it's also, our report is published. So please also check it so you can see it via HRWG, Human Rights Working Group website. Professor Dufara's question is, from the fieldwork in these different countries, you have seen many issues. Do you also see some good practices in dealing with migrant workers? In what way it can or cannot be implemented in other countries? So I'd like to finish with some good or bright way. So could you still say something? Yeah.
Yeah, is this more about from the government, or is this just in general?
I think it's more general, both governments or there are other kinds of practices.
No, I think what we saw. I mean, everyone is trying, so this is quite clear. Like everyone's trying to deal with these issues, and there is a lot of initiative from different actors. And we criticize a lot of government measures, but we know that there's a lot of translation efforts done, a lot of hotline set up. It's just not reaching as much yet, because and I think that's where the practitioners or the people from the community leaders can come in and to link that so that it will reach out to the people who needs more. So I think that is like sort of supporting resilience, that we can work together better way, that the informations and services that provided are actually known by the people who need the support and the best. And also, of course, I think the pandemic has really highlighted a lot of groups of people who are very vulnerable situation, and I hope that this is raise awareness of the issues that people are facing, and yeah, it's something that brings positive change. Just very general comment, sorry, but yeah, that's from me.
Daniel?
For me, if I may, we put it resilience is our title of the book, because we really want to show up that there is also a good example, some good example, done not just only by civil society, self-help group, but also the government. They try, they make some like unprecedented things happening, like for instance, I have to appreciate like Japan governments also provide cash handout, to everybody basically, even though there are some criticism about it, but at least it is like unprecedented measures taken by the government responding to the COVID. So basically this is like something that if we can continue support those resilience, those good example, good practices, initiative, I'm quite sure that in the future we can shape our society becoming more inclusive, because it is becoming already happening during the pandemic then, and it is maybe our role together to really bring a good image of those kinds of initiative and then push forward addressing the initiative, and then hopefully it becoming not just only ad hoc or charity-based initiative, but also it's becoming something to be considered in the future. To develop more resilient society.
Thank you. So, Professor Farah, do you have anything to say to them?
Thank you very much for your responses. And also, I just hope through your work, we can come up with some normative responses, suggestions and policy suggestions for both national government and regional government, because we know we need to do something, but we need to know what to do, right? So I think some normative responses will be pretty good. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for everybody's participation. And thank you so much, Sir Daniel and Mariko, for having that wonderful presentation and also answer all the questions. I really would like to say thanks for two of them. And so all participants coming here today, thank you so much for joining us today. And I'd like to just share this. So our seminar will be still continued. And the next one is, the 17th December, our institute also hosts a Zoom seminar again. And the topic is China as an authoritarian diaspora state, controlling transnational space. It starts from 5 p.m. in Tokyo time. And if you visit us, our website, IAM website, so you can easily find the information. So please also register here. And what a coincidence. So Daniel's, Mariko's seminar and our seminar is the same day. So, but so I hope so you will either of the seminar. Yeah. So thank you so much for participating today. So take care, and so thank you so much.
Thank you. Arigato gozaimasu.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you
so much.
Thank you,
Thank you,
everyone.
Prof.
Thank
for the participation.
you.